Hello, it's that time of year again where zombies and vampires come knocking at your doors, trying to take what you have. Yeah. Hello,
Your
it's that
sweets.
time of year
I can
again
hear
where
myself in the
zombies and
background.
vampires
That
come
isn't what's
knocking at
supposed
your...
to happen.
Right, sorry. What?
Also, there we go. No, never mind.
So, what is a sci-fi stream without a couple of bugs? And bugs are creepy and crawly, and that sort of ties in tonight as well. So tonight we're going to be discussing one of our favorite sort of things, and that is horror, and the aspects that horror plays in our lives, and the philosophical concepts that we can extract from horror. So hopefully you'll join us and we can discuss all of these amazing films, and join us in the chat. And hey, if you're free, maybe you can even jump on stream with us for a more jovial discussion. Anyway, hope you're going to enjoy the show. So hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And you might notice that we've changed things around a little bit again. I decided that we're going to throw off Braxton by making Dave the guy on the left for tonight, and maybe the foreseeable. Yeah, that's right, Dave. You're the guy on the left tonight.
I'm always on the left because, I'm a big old lefty.
Well, speaking of which, did you see that she's quit? Or resigned?
Yeah, I've been making fun of it all day.
Ah,
I made a meme earlier, the same picture meme?
Yeah.
With the Muppets on one side and the Tories on the other.
I must have missed that one. But, I mean, to be honest, I think everything's in a complete shambles. UK politics is its own horror show at the moment, isn't it, Dave?
Not so much horror as, Ealing comedy.
A tragedy.
Yeah. A tragic comedy?
Yeah, Shakespearean tragedy.
It'll soon be tragedy because apparently
Boris is coming back. Yeah.
I think this was what was planned. They just threw out a couple of fucking idiots, right? Knowing they would fail. And then Boris could come back and say, well, look, my clown car isn't as fucking clownish as them. So I'm like a Porsche compared to them. Let my clown car back in.
Yeah. Zombies, the lot of them.
Yeah.
So speaking of zombies, segue. We're here tonight not to discuss UK politics, but to discuss zombies and vampires and all things horror. But we're going to be taking a slightly different approach to most people, and we're going to be pulling out the philosophical concepts for it. Now, I've always said that I love horror, but in comparison to Dave, I am someone who's got no clue about horror and has never watched one in their life. So Dave is going to be taking the charge on tonight and running us through all these concepts, aren't you?
Yeah, you can put it all on the credit card if I'm taking charge. Although I don't think I have a credit card machine, so PayPal us. No, I'm happy with that. We've already discussed some of the things that we're going to kind of discuss tonight. We've discussed the paradox of horror in the past, as well as the rationality of horror. So we're going to touch on them again because they're quite important concepts when it comes to, the philosophy of horror and whatnot. And in that, we're going to kind of discuss what makes horror enjoyable. Why do people watch it? And then also look at some of the common themes in horror and Maybe talk about a few films that have some philosophical ideas in it that maybe people don't see and don't pull out, because a lot of the times when you watch a horror movie, you just watch it for the adrenaline rush or what have you. But there are some very clever horror films out there with underlying elements that a lot of people don't see and are actually kind of relevant and can make good social commentary. And I mean, that's one of the things about horror, isn't it? That it allows us to delve into the current fears of the society that the horror is being written in and being written about.
Yeah, most definitely. I think very much that is the case. I think a lot of people who say they don't like horror say it because the only forms of horror they've really ever experienced are those sort of slasher style jump horror that have no real depth to them. They're just there. I mean, they have their purpose. And
Well, you see, I think some of those slashers have a deeper depth than many people kind of realize.
there.
Some don't. Some don't. Some are just straight up slasher flicks designed to get you jumping off your seat and keep you on the edge of your seat sometimes. Or, as we put it once, push you back into your seat. The thriller keeps you on the edge, the horror pushes you back.
Yeah. Yeah, recoil. That was it. Horror can make you recoil in either disgust or fear. Whereas a thriller is supposed to be keeping you tense and on the edge of your seat, which is why the discussion of why elevated horror isn't exactly a thriller, even though they might have a crossover, because the point of the elevated horror is still to make you have that recoil, that push back into your seat, rather than sitting on the edge of the seat in suspense. And you could be right that some of these slashes do have some more deeper concepts to them, though my general experience, and I must admit I stopped watching the jump horror, at least intentionally. I mean, some horrors I watch happen to be a jump horror and I'm disappointed. But I stopped watching them a long time ago because I did tend to find them all the same sort of thing. And always that, oh, it's the quiet bit. Oh, it's gone really quiet. And oh, there's the jump. And it's like, right. Okay. Whatever. But yeah, there are definitely other concepts that are going to be going alongside. It could have a bit of social commentary on it, and I'm not against there being a lot of violence in these horrors. I think it's great when they can achieve their goal without doing all the violence. But you think about movies and TV series like The Purge. The way they do things, there's a hell of a lot of social commentary and you can almost see the way the world's going, heading that way, whether legally sanctioned or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the TV series did something that the movies didn't. Though I've only watched a couple of the movies, but the way the TV series had that bit between the purges, or at least the second one was between the purges. That was just having a look at the sort of how it affected everybody. So just gonna say it now before we actually say anything more. There will be spoilers tonight.
Yeah, most definitely. Even if it's not story spoilers, it's idea spoilers.
And to get some of those ideas out, you might have to discuss a little bit of the story. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what we should probably start with is the actual paradox of horror. And this is quite a popular one. Noel Carroll speaks about this one a lot.
All right.
And the idea of the paradox of horror is that horror is filled with things that scare us and disgust us. And in our normal everyday lives, these are the kind of things that we try to avoid. Yes, there are people that go around going to find disgusting road accidents and they might want to go see an autopsy happen. But the average person does their best to avoid these scary situations.
Mm.
Most people wouldn't go up and go on the lookout for a serial killer. They wouldn't go watch somebody being skinned alive, or they wouldn't want to see their friends put on meat hooks, or if they knew Jigsaw was real, they wouldn't want to go and watch his victims suffer.
No.
But when it comes to horror movies, we pay good money. Well, I don't, but people pay good money to go to the cinema, or they go out of their way to put one on. They know that this film is going to horrify them, disgust them, cause them fear, make them jump out of their seats. So there seems to be this paradox of, well, why do we go after these things that disgust us?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we did discuss this in more detail in a previous stream, but there are certain things that you can find exciting from it. I mean, there is that sort of adrenaline rush that you get from it without the actual danger there, and without the actual thing happening. Your disbelief is momentarily suspended, but not completely. You're absorbed in this world, this thing horrifies you, and you get this intense feeling, but it's not real, so you can let it go. Whereas when there are horrors that have things in them that are closer to being real, I can sometimes find that they can be more troublesome. So I enjoyed the movie The Descent, for example. And we might discuss this in more detail later, but I actually found, before the bit where it gets to a bit with monsters, I actually found their descent into the caves more scary because of the cave-ins and things like that. The actual claustrophobic feeling that was going on, and all the tension that was building up, and just the fact that they could just be buried alive down there. And that offered me real fear, because I could envision that actually happening. Whereas the monsters, they make you jump. Yeah, they're scary. Okay, yeah, maybe they're metaphysically possible, but incredibly unlikely in this world. So then they're easier to let go of. Oh, the monster scared me, but, I know it's not real. So I think that is part of why we do enjoy these films. We get to experience them without having the actual experience.
Oops, sorry, my computer kind of hung for a second.
Yeah,
there.
I just saw that.
It does it occasionally. I don't know what it is. It's something to do with this laptop. Occasionally, it'll just freeze for that split second and then carry on.
Ah.
Okay, so you bring up a good point there. That is one of the theories about why we enjoy horror films. It gives us an adrenaline rush that we can't really get elsewhere quite so easily. I mean, if you think about going on a roller coaster, you get to that top of the thing and you know it's coming, and you know that you're about to drop, and you tense yourself up, and then it goes over the hill and it drops down, and you get that release of adrenaline, and it's like, yeah, I'm alive. And there's an idea that some of us watch horror for that very reason. It allows us to feel that sort of primal fear that we don't really get in society anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you will if you live in certain areas, like filled with gang violence, that kind of thing. But most people live in very safe environments these days, in very safe spaces. And
I
if you
hope they
think,
do.
yeah. And as a society, that's what we should be aiming for, really, shouldn't we?
Most definitely.
But if you think about our evolutionary process, we used to live for a very long time fearing the predator, fearing what's around the corner. What's that noise in the bush? And we sort of lived on that edge, and we always had that. And there might be some kind of primal need within us to get back to that sort of primal fear.
Mm.
And that's one of the reasons why we watch the horror, because it gives us something that we can't get elsewhere. And we spend our lives in certain kinds of fear constantly. Can I pay the bills? Am I going to get sick?
Will I get
Um,
fired? Will my
will I get
wife
fired?
leave me? Yeah.
Yeah. And we have no real release for them. Um, so we find these places to actually get this kind of basic adrenaline rush and this basic purging of emotions, which is another idea of why we watch horror films, for the purging of these emotions.
Much in the way
Not just
that
the
a
adrenaline.
really high intensity workout can have the same sort of effect, except you don't have to
Yes.
put as much effort in.
Yeah. And if you think about something like in our lives, we're told to keep our emotions in check all the time.
Mm.
Um, we kind of keep them hidden and below the surface. And if you think about a good drama or something like that, that allows you to have a good cry or feel sad, and it gives you that legitimate excuse to actually feel those things,
Mm.
without being looked on as being, less of a person or a beta male or whatever they call them these days. So it gives you that kind of excuse to actually have this purging of emotion, and it lets you get rid of all these pent up emotions. So that's another reason why we might watch horror, because we have these fears inside of us. And if we just allow ourselves to live in fear constantly, even if we don't know that we're doing it, living in fear constantly can make you kind of numb, can't it?
Hmm.
Um, and so a good horror film will let you release that fear, purge it from you. And part of that as well is, if you think about it, it's the building up as well. Um, a good horror will build up those emotions and make you tense and make you
Hmm.
kind of on the edge. And if it's masterfully done, it'll build you to a crescendo like a roller coaster,
Hmm.
and then send you over the thing to the downhill slide, and you're like, yeah, I'm alive. So it allows you to purge those emotions as well as get the adrenaline rush.
Hmm. Yeah. Kimmo raises another point, saying that, for example, driving past a deadly car crash affords us the opportunity to think, at least it's not me. And so
Yep,
that's
that's
something.
another one that I'll be bringing up soon.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. um, I also think another thing that you can get in horror that you don't necessarily get elsewhere. I mean, you might in certain sci-fi films and things like that. Is it raises a lot of questions and has a lot of good ideas that don't really get addressed in other films.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like the social commentary that I was referring to earlier, you
Hmm.
get a lot of that in horror. But oftentimes it's overlooked because horror is seen as, it's looked upon as the dirty child of cinema.
Yep.
It's the guilty pleasure. Rather than the, this is what we should be watching. It's the, I watch it when, but I'm not proud of it. But people should be proud of watching horror movies because, like a good sci-fi, like you said, they have these kind of ideas and social commentaries in them that sci-fi has, just in a very different way.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. And obviously, when you get a sci-fi horror, it blends the two, and they tend to be really good when they're done well. I mean, things like Event Horizon, for example.
Fantastic film, one of my
Yeah.
favorites. Yeah,
Um. So yeah.
and the Alien is another good one, and it's one that I'm going to bring up later because there's some ideas in it that most people might not have pulled out, might not have seen. I don't know it in great detail. I only know the basics, but I'll let you know them later.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. Great set of films. To be honest, I like the fact that they all did something different.
Yeah, they took it and went in a different direction to the film before, even though they still had the same kind of alien. They just looked at it from very different angles.
Yeah, and they just did different pieces of cinema with it. Yes, there was always the horror element there in the sense of the big bad alien coming to kill them, but it wasn't necessarily horror like as its first genre. The second one became like a sci-fi action that just happened to have aliens, didn't it? You know.
Yeah.
So, and they did different things with all of them. So that was really really good the way they did that. I know they did start to get a bit worse.
Yeah.
But
I wasn't keen on
the
what
fourth
were the
one.
latest ones? No.
Oh, you're talking about the Predators and things like that?
No. It not what was Prometheus. That's it.
Fair. No, I actually enjoyed those, but I think they were really oversold.
And very pretentious.
Yeah, but I did like the idea behind them, and it was nice sort of seeing the idea of where it started and the idea of these, world builders thinking that they were just going to get rid of Earth because, well, they can because it's theirs, it's their right. They built Earth, they built all the biology on it, and therefore, they feel like they've got no ethical concern and things like that. I felt like were good to extract from it.
It was just a very sloppy sort of reference to religion, and like not a very subtle one either. So yeah,
I agree. I preferred the one that they did after that, the Alien Covenant.
That was good. The one with Danny McBride.
I'm terrible with names, so I'll just say yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was him. That one, yeah. But that's a good thing to mention, because that's another one of the ideas, and you can kind of see this idea in religion. When you ask somebody, or some religious people will make an argument like, well, if there's no God, then there's no ultimate justice. Yeah. You would have heard that one before.
Oh, yes.
And so would most atheists. Yeah. Which shows that there's a kind of drive in us for these things. We want to see justice happen. We want to see the bad guys get what's coming to them. And so there's an element of that in horror when you think about it, where the bad guys. Have you ever seen Last House on the Left?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I
Wes
don't know if that
Craven's
was
first
because I
film.
worked in Blockbuster, and so a lot of films sound familiar.
Probably not, because it was banned in the UK until like the early 2000s.
How many years ago was that?
About 20.
About 22.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might have. But it was one of the most heavily banned films in the world, and it was banned in the UK. And it's Wes Craven's first film. And what it's about is these two girls from the suburbs go into New York to watch a concert. And while they're there, they think, oh, I want to get some weed. And they approach this guy, and he offers to sell them weed and says, come back with me. And when he gets to the house, there's like a group of kidnappers there, and rapists and sadists. And they kidnap the girls, and they take the girls and torture them in the woods and rape them and eventually kill them. And it turns out that they've actually done it in the lake by the girls' home.
Right.
So they wash off in the lake, and they go to the home thinking, oh, we broke down. Can you help us? And the parents offer them a place to stay. And then they realize that these people have killed their daughters. And the rest of the film is spent seeing them get punished by the parents. So there's a sense of justice that goes on in them. And there's a lot of horror films like this when you think about it. One of the themes is justice, seeing the people get what they deserve, seeing the bad guys get what they deserve. Even though you spend a lot of the time getting to know the bad guys and seeing why they deserve it, there's this sense of seeing people get what you think they deserve. So there's a sense of wish fulfillment when it comes to watching a horror, in the same sense that religion gives that sort of wish fulfillment.
Yeah, and sometimes it comes about in different ways. Sometimes the big bad is targeting the earthly bad. Um, Although sometimes the other thing that some horrors do is they actually allow the bad guys to win as well, which you generally don't find in other movies. And it adds a little bit of realism because a lot of time in the real world, the bad guys win.
Yeah. Which increases the horror element.
Mm,
So that's a different kind of horror.
of course.
Um, you've seen Scream, haven't you?
Yes.
That's another one where you see the bad guys torture these kids all throughout the film, like harassing the final girl, and the final girl finds out who they are. They try to kill her, and she gets revenge. She
Mm.
takes them out, and there's that certain sense of satisfaction in watching Nev Campbell kill the people.
Hmm.
So that could be another reason. Um, and there's another one like this, and this one sort of blends into it. It's you think about um, Friday the 13th,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of films where, like in the slasher genre, where sex and death are kind of linked. Anybody
Hmm.
who that's one of the rules that they mention in Scream. If you have sex, you're on the death list. Yeah. Um, and you'll have these teenagers who aren't one of the cool kids. They're watching these jocks on screen get all the things that they couldn't get. They're popular. They get the girl. They get to have sex. And these nerdy teens aren't getting that. So they watch it and see these kids get what they think is coming to them. It's fulfilling their wish. Ha, I can't have it, and you can't either.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So there's that element of that. And this brings us back to kind of what Kimmo said, where it's a sense of superiority. When you look at the car crash, at least that wasn't me.
Yep. I put back up on
Yeah,
stream just so people can remember. Yeah. His actual words were driving past a deadly car crash affords us the opportunity to think, at least it's not me.
yeah.
I mean, that it's not necessarily a sense of superiority, but it's counting your lucky stars.
Still a kind of sense of superiority, though. At least that hasn't happened to me.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, and the same with these kids. If you think about like the sort of pseudo religious, moralistic type of people, well, you shouldn't be having sex before marriage, and they see somebody getting punished for having sex before marriage. So it feeds into their sense of moral superiority.
Yeah.
Um, and how many times, when you think about a common horror trope, if that was me, I wouldn't be so stupid as to go into the basement. I'd get out of the house. Look at how dumb these
Mm.
people are.
Yeah.
And again, that builds on our sense of superiority when we watch the horror film. Well, at least I wouldn't be stupid enough to do that. Look
I
at these dumb people. They're
never get caught in
idiots.
that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's quite a common thing that seems to happen. I mean, that's one of the things I didn't like about the average jump scare horror because it was filled with this sort of idiocy, and I found that painful to watch because I thought most people probably wouldn't be this dumb. I mean, there are times when you're scared and all reason goes out the window. Yeah, sure, I can accept that, but for every single person who is experiencing what's going on in this movie to just act in the same way and just be like you're just walking into it. It was just so frustrating to watch.
Yeah, it can be, especially if you don't suffer from that sort of sense of superiority, but you think about many people, and many people do kind of have that.
Mm.
Um, if you, I've heard people say, of course there should be poor people because that makes me appreciate what I've got more. I know it sounds stupid, but I've actually heard those words. And like, if you can't afford your healthcare, then you should suffer. I can afford my healthcare. I don't have to suffer.
Yeah, I don't like that sort of thinking.
I don't, but there is a lot of people that do have that thinking.
Mm.
Um, or how many people look down on the McDonald's worker?
Hmm.
Well, I've got the skilled job. I've got the £15 an hour job. You've got the £3.50 an hour job. I'm much better than you. Serve me my food.
Yeah.
Inherent in a bunch of people is that sense of superiority, and horror can help them fulfill that.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that comes down to if someone's a hardcore libertarian. Well, I don't have kids. Why am I paying tax towards the schools? And I've got my own healthcare. Why am I paying into yours? And I mean, I even had a close friend who didn't see the point in him paying his national insurance because he didn't really go to the doctors much, and it was just like it's a whole service that paid for everyone, and you know at some point you may need it, and if you're lucky enough not to, hey, at least someone has benefited from, in comparison to your pay packet, it's a minimal amount. And to be honest, I wish more of the tax went on that sort of thing than elsewhere. um, but yeah, so they're the sort of people that would take the opportunity to hint in the movie, well, I wouldn't do that, you're a fucking idiot, I'm so much better than you.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that element to horror as well, and that might be why some people enjoy watching these horrific things happen, because they're horrific things happening to people they think deserve it.
Yeah. And that comes into sort of ties into almost a form of victim blaming, doesn't it? It's something I don't
Yeah,
particularly like. It's one of those things where even in conversations on the internet, and I'm gonna not go off too much, but when people think that people are deserving of ridicule for things they believe and the way they go on it, and it's like, I don't think the people are necessarily deserving of ridicule. I mean, if you think they've got an erroneous belief, for example, they should be helped to see the error in this particular belief rather than ridiculing them. And this also ties into this sort of sense of superiority that you're talking of. Well, I'm better than you and you're not worthy of my time, so I'm just going to ridicule you because I am that much better than you.
yeah. And how many people watch horror films and do something like that? They ridicule the people, they ridicule the situation. So it ties into that as
Mm.
well. And another reason that people might watch horror films, they don't watch them for the horror element. You think of those sort of self-aware kind of horror films that are slightly comedic and kind of mock themselves.
Hmm.
They're a bit kitschy. It's sort of like why you enjoy going to the seaside, because you've got all these little stupid things like burgers on the seafront and chips in a thing, and it's you like the terrible kind of like seats, the big seats. It's just, or like stupid artwork that you buy, like a Sonic poster.
Hmm.
You enjoy it just for the sake of the sort of crappiness of it.
Hmm.
Um, and there are horror films like that. You think of some of the horror films that you watch. Some of the most terribly made horror films are some of the best.
Oh,
Just
definitely.
because, just because they're so crappy and so bad it's good.
Hmm.
And there's that element of horror as well. And that might be some of the reasons why we're drawn to horror films, because you can't really get away with that with an action film or a drama.
Hmm.
A romantic comedy can't really be that bad. Those kind of films require good acting and good sets and good production.
Maybe less so on the action front. I mean, there was a big call for people
Yeah, the
dissing
B
the
movie
80s
action.
style action, and as you say, the B
Yeah.
movie style action. But other than that, yes, I definitely see your point
But with
there.
a horror film, you could have people just take a video camera,
Hmm.
take some friends, go out into the woods and make a terrible slasher.
Hmm.
Can't really do that with an action film.
No.
So there's that element as well. And like the whole self-aware thing where if you've watched, say, the entire series of Chucky, the Child's Play series, when you get to the final few films, they become sort of self-aware and they poke fun at themselves. and you're in on that joke because you've been following that for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And another way to look at it is you've grown up watching these horror films that scared you as a teenager. And now that you're older, they become self aware and they poke fun at themselves.
Mm.
So you've moved beyond being scared by them and you're now mocking them.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives that sense of satisfaction. Like, I've moved beyond my fears. I've become an adult. I'm no longer scared by these things. I laugh at them.
Yeah, fair. A lot of good reasons, then, really, to actually enjoy horror. Many dimensions. I don't think necessarily a single horror movie would be able to fulfill all of those reasons, because some of them are quite contradictory.
Yeah. Not all horror films fit into one of these categories,
and some probably fit into none of them.
Some fit. It all kind of depends.
Rev made a comment earlier saying also most of the zombie movies of the 80s tied into toxic waste and corporate greed, and that ties back into sort of the social commentary bit that we were just talking about before, which is one of those things that you do find in a lot of horror movies. So yeah, I can understand that. And Rev also says bad ninja movies are great as well. Some of them are
my favorite genres.
Yeah.
Some of them I love the old Hong Kong kung fu films, and I love the ninja films. Shokasugi is one of my favorites. Like, unless you know the ninja films, you won't know who that is. That one. But yeah, but he basically embodied the ninja films of the 80s.
But so yes, there's a lot of good reasons for this paradox to not be such a paradox after all.
Yeah, and there's still a couple more.
Oh, right.
Following on from the kitsch one, I've just seen Rev post Jim Kata. What a fucking fantastic film. A kung fu film where all the kung fu is done on a box horse and the guy's doing gymnastics. It's so outrageously bad. It's one of the best films of the 80s.
Awesome.
Yeah. So this kind of ties into the sort of kitsch element that I just mentioned. There's another reason. You can watch it for the skill. The skill of putting together a moody piece. And the skill of the director in using the music and the colors and the shadows to paint a picture that draws you in. Makeup, yeah. And the special effects. Do you know who Tom Savini is?
Nope.
Okay, he was a big FX artist in the 80s and the 90s, and he still does some stuff today. Have you ever watched From Dusk Till Dawn?
Yes.
You know the guy with the gun penis?
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, I can't remember what he's called, but there's a bit where he sat in the bar and he pushes a button and a gun flops out from his jockstrap or his codpiece. That's Tom Savini. In later years, he was started to be put into films as like an acknowledgement of how great his FX work was. So there's that as well that we can watch a horror film for, because it's like painting a picture.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times have you watched a horror and gone, how did they do that?
Especially a lot as I was younger.
Yeah, and because there was a lot of practical effects back then. Today, that sort of skill is lost and it's all computer effects, but you can appreciate how good the computer effects are.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes today the computer effects are almost as good as the real thing, but I still, at this moment in time, think a well done real effect looks better than computer generated stuff.
The practical mogwai of Gremlins, it beats out any sort of computer effect as far as I'm concerned. There's something about practical effects where there's a certain weight. Like, have you watched She-Hulk?
Yes.
I can't gel with that computer. It looks kind of good and all that, but there's a certain weirdness to the physics.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's one of the reasons why I didn't watch Avatar for ages. Now, I ended up really loving the film, but for ages I just couldn't handle this blend of like a total CG world and non CG. And again, things just didn't sit right in it. Even though it was done incredibly well, it still wasn't quite right. And obviously, I know technology's come on a bit since then, but I don't think She-Hulk is necessarily the same budget that Avatar had.
Oh, no, definitely not. But that can pull you out of the world in a way where you're slightly more forgiving about a dodgy practical effect. Because it's still, you can suspend your kind of like belief about it. You know, you can suspend your disbelief because there still seems to be something kind of real about it. And you can appreciate the kind of skill and the effort that it took. Whereas when you're watching something and somebody floats without actual physics, it's jarring. It's more jarring than a bad practical effect.
Yeah, no,
so that's another that's another reason why we might enjoy horror, just to enjoy the sheer skill of some of these artists.
Just to add in there, though, I have been enjoying She-Hulk,
I thought it was great. It's one of my favorite Marvel shows.
Yeah, they've done a really good job with it. Apart from CG, just doesn't sit
effects,
right.
Yeah, that's it. And so there's one more reason why people might enjoy horror, and it is to do with the disgust. Some people just enjoy being disgusted. Some people want to push their limits. Like, how many times have you seen on YouTube, I watched the Cartel Chainsaw video? I've watched this. And in the 80s, the horror films pushed more and more.
Especially when it went into the realms of snuff.
Yeah, or pretend snuff, you know. There were films. Have you ever heard of a film called Guinea Pig? The Guinea Pig series. There's one called Flowers of Flesh and Blood, and it's the one that made Charlie Sheen call the FBI and say, this is a real murder. The effects were so good, and it literally was just a guy in a faux samurai helmet and chopping up a woman. And there's a scene where he pushes a pin into the woman's eye, and the eye pops and liquid spurts out, and it looks very real. And you had films like Cannibal Holocaust, where the effects were made to be as real as possible, and they even had actual animal killings in it. And there's a series called Faces of Death, where they claim that the killings in it are all real, and it's all film footage. To some extent, you could say it was like found footage before found footage. And people would seek them out and watch them to see just how bad they were and see if that would be the final straw that they could take. So another reason why people might watch horror is to push those limits, to see how bad how much they can take.
And I think you tend to find those sorts of people try to find something that is that disgusting. They love showing it to other people as well, and see if they can
I used to.
Those people
I used to as a teenager, yeah. I used to collect the banned films because some of them are fantastic, but some of them are just, why is this banned? How bad can it be? And you watch it, you think, well, it's not that bad. And you show it to somebody else who's not used to this kind of hardcore horror. And they're like, what the fuck did I just watch?
Yeah, fair.
And you take pleasure from their reaction.
Yeah. In the same way that you could turn it round and go, you know, if you're watching a comedy with someone who doesn't find it funny, you don't find it as funny. Whereas if you're watching it with a bunch of people who have a similar sense of humor, you know,
it adds to it.
You take the pleasure from their pleasure, and if what you like is the disgust, seeing other people's disgust enhances your own pleasure at the disgust.
Yeah. Kimmo brought up a good example of a film today that's kind of like this, The Human Centipede. Another one could be the Serbian film.
To be honest, I've not seen either of them. I got the concept of what The Human Centipede was and thought, Don't really need to see that.
Yeah, I'm not really into that kind of horror anymore. It just doesn't do anything for me
No.
anymore.
I mean, to be
Um,
honest, I saw the South Park version and thought that was good enough for me.
yeah, and like a Serbian film is one of those films where there's no real plot. It's just all about how far can they take it, how far can they push you, how disgusted can they make you, and I'm long past all that.
Mm.
Um, Funnily enough, there's a point to link to Hellraiser about this. If you think about Hellraiser, that's kind of what it's about. People who are trying to push their limits, they're trying to seek out that ultimate pleasure, that ultimate disgust, that moment where it breaks them. And that's kind of what these people are doing. Except they don't have Pinhead at the other end.
We have such sights to show you.
And that's basically what it is.
Interesting. Something just popped up in the chat. Hang on 1 second. Rev brings up a point saying people like watching other people in cringe situations in horror or even in comedy. There are a lot of comedy scenes that would be someone's nightmare. Yeah, see, I'm not good with cringe comedy at all. And I think part of it is in my day-to-day life, I'm quite a cringy person anyway. So I feel a bit too real when I see cringe comedy because I'm like, oh, I've done that thing, and I can't take it. But that's sort of what I was describing with some of the horror when it's really real. When it's I find it more terrifying, like in the situation in The Descent when they were first coming down and descending down the caves, much scarier than when the actual monsters came. And I think that's the same sort of thing with comedy. Like cringe comedy just generally doesn't do it for me. I think that's why like if you've ever seen the UK Office, it is so much more cringy than say the US Office. I've not watched much of either, but I can handle the US Office because it's a bit more, rather than being cringy, it's just dumb. Whereas, like, I mean, to be honest, pretty much everything Ricky Gervais does is cringe anyway, especially any of his philosophical takes.
Yeah.
But I can't watch his comedy or anything like that. Saying that, I mean, there's a couple of TV series he's done which are all right, and credit to him. I always give credit to people who I generally dislike that managed to do something that I'm like, yeah, that was good, and that was Afterlife. So I mean, that was all right. There's still a couple of moments in it that were, but anyway, this is about horror, not cringing. Sorry. And can I just say hello to everybody who's here? There's quite a few of you in the chat now, so I'm just going to say hello to Mark, Lone Wolf, Claire, Rev, Kimo. Who else is here with us, Dave? I'm trying to remember. Oh, Autistic Shill. How could I forget you? It's because you're a zombie now. And I just couldn't think of that because, you know, zombies have eaten my brains already. And Jovial Dane, how you doing, Pierre? And is that everyone that I just saw in the chat? I think it might be. And if I've forgotten anyone, I do apologize. Say hello. And anyone out there still watching, like you, Jared, hello. How you doing? Anyone out there, feel free to drop by the chat and just say hello and let us know what you think about horror movies or anything like that. So far, we've been discussing the paradox of horror. And we haven't got deep into horror movies yet, although a few have obviously come up naturally through the conversation. But is there anything left on the paradox of horror? I think you said that was the last one, didn't you, Dave?
Yeah, that was the last one. Those are some of the main theories about why we enjoy watching horror films.
And I think they all sort of work.
Reasons.
You know,
Yeah, I do.
Just as I said earlier, not all of them at once, you know, and some of them, they just don't work. And in the situations where you're saying, well, none of these tick the box, you probably don't enjoy that film.
Yeah. It's kind of like comedy. Like, not all comedies do it for us. There's certain comedies where people find them super funny, and I'll just sit there like, what am I supposed to be laughing at? It's the same with horror.
And some of that is your mental state of the day. There are times when I can watch something that I find funny generally, and I watch it again and I go, ugh. And sometimes it's the people you're around. And as you say, sometimes it's just something that it's not your type of humor. And I often found that with a lot of my friends, both the type of horror and the type of comedy that they enjoyed weren't the types that I enjoyed. It was the jump horror and the cringe comedy, and neither of those do it for me. Feeling a bit chilly? Yeah, see, and the sort of comedy I enjoy is terrible puns. So there you go. Yes, Jared. So horror by yourself is different than horror with others. I mean, there are certain things that you can share in the experience, and that other people's reactions can enhance it with you, but it can also make it a little bit more comforting. If something is really, really, really scary, sharing that experience with someone else can sort of ease it too, or having someone to discuss it with and sort of breaking the tension between you and the screen. And yeah, there's so many different ways that having other people there could affect the experience.
Yeah, that's why I enjoy watching them with Emma, because I don't suffer from jump scares. But Emma does, and there's it adds a certain element when she jumps and like smacks me in the face because she jumped out of her skin, and it adds a depth to it that I wouldn't get from that film if I watched it on my own, because I don't feel that fear.
Yeah, that's fair. I have a sort of similar one with Katie, actually. She, even though she believes gods don't exist, she is afraid of ghosts, and she can't even fully quantify what it is about it. Like even if you go through the reasoning with her, she knows she shouldn't believe ghosts exist, but she still does. And if there's if we're watching something that the focus is ghosts, she's absolutely terrified, and we have to put on some really dumb comedy afterwards just so that she can actually get to sleep. It's something that absolutely terrifies her. Whereas when it's most ghost things, again, it's sort of like the jump scares for you. It's just like a meh. Whereas you get that experience of someone else being so terrified, you sort of share that experience, don't you?
Emotions are things that we share. That's one of the reasons why the cinema works so well, especially in a horror film, because you're in a room full of that tension. And that emotion becomes, it's not just your emotion, it becomes the cinema's emotion, and you get caught up in it. So, yeah.
So there's another reason for the to contest the paradox of horror.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
So there is another philosophical thing that can be asked about horror films. And we've covered this one before, but I thought, as we're talking about these things, and most people might not have seen the previous one, and that's, is it even rational to be scared by horror films? I mean, we know the things on the screen are real. We know that they can't harm us, but yet people feel this fear. They come out of the cinema having been scared. They jump out of their seats in a very scary scene, or they might be horrified by the elements that they've seen on the screen, but they know, unless you're a little kid, they know, and I mean, most kids know cinema's fake as well. But they know that those things that they're watching are real, and yet there still seems to be this fear that comes to people from watching those horror films.
Yeah, and I mean, we discussed a lot of different points on this before, and I think the thing is, you go into that and you almost allow yourself to have that fear. And I think in general, most people afterwards, like I was saying, you've had the experience of being scared by it, but now you're back in the real world and you realize that it's not an ongoing thing. And your disbelief is only suspended sort of momentarily and not totally, because you're not so scared that you go and call the police on and say there's this thing happening, this murder that happened at so and so place. Go send out a squad car or whatever. You don't actually think these monsters are coming to get you. I mean, back to your kids' example, you might actually be worried that there are these monsters out there that are going to come and get you because it plays on your mind a lot more. But I think the rationality comes from you're seeking the experience and you're allowing yourself to have that experience. And the only time perhaps it does become irrational is if you're maintaining that sort of fear post it, and actually acting on it. If you were to actually act on the fear that you got from a movie that straight up says it's fiction, that is when it goes into the realms of irrationality. And do you know what? Maybe sometimes we just like to be a little bit irrational at times. Maybe you get a bit of enjoyment from that. You're aware that you're rationally being irrational.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's kind of Walton's thing, that um, we're not actually feeling fear. We're we're feeling an almost fear, because that lack of motivation, like you said, it doesn't drive you to go and pick up the phone to report the Michael Myers outside Laurie Stroud's house. Um, and you don't report the serial killer who got away with dumping the body in the lake.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of engage in a contract with the filmmaker that you'll allow yourself to get lost in their story, and so you have the feelings but not the emotion,
Mm.
not the motivating drives. There's also another theory, I think this one,
Before you do
and
that, I mean, I think we
yeah,
should just focus on this distinction, because it was in our stream that we did about this. It was something that I found very, very interesting. And if someone hasn't seen it before, that distinction between the emotion and the feeling, just explained a little bit more, would be very, very, very useful to them.
yeah, sure. So when we think about emotions, emotions are things that motivate us. Fear is an emotion, um, in that it'll cause us to run away from something. But being scared might not necessarily motivate you. It it it's just like a feeling inside you where you're kind of shaky, got a bit of adrenaline, but it's just a feeling. Um, when you watch a comedy, you're you haven't got a full on happiness emotion. You've got a feeling of laughter, a feeling of joy. So there is a slight difference between an emotion, because an emotion has a motivating factor, and a feeling, which is just something that we feel like. Um, if you step out into glorious sunshine and it washes over you, you feel that warmth, um, and you think, "Yeah, that's it." Whereas, say you really appreciated and felt really happy because of it, it might drive you to go to the beach. It might
Hmm.
drive you to go have a swim in the ocean, or if you live near one. So there is a distinction between feeling and emotion.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's one of
One
those
way you
things
could
that,
think of it is emotive. In other words, emotions have a motivation.
yeah, and I think that was one of the things when we were discussing this last time that was just sort of a switch in my head that just sort of really helped the idea click. So thank you for explaining that again.
It's all good. We go into it in greater detail in, I think it's The Horror of It All.
I
I
believe
think
so.
that's the one where we discuss the Kendall Walton's theory. And I mean, another theory, which is, I think this one comes from, might be Kathleen Stock, is that you're not actually feeling any of these. You're playing a part with your friends. You're pretending to be scared because there's a bonding element with who you're with. And this kind of goes back to something we said. There's a difference between watching a horror film with somebody you know and on your own, because you're playing a part when you watch a horror film, or when you watch a comedy, you're playing a part with your friends. The part is friendship and camaraderie and all liking the same kind of thing. So you sort of play this part even if you don't realize it.
All life is a stage.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, that one I don't necessarily fully accept, because the way I see it, you genuinely do have these feelings. So it's not like you're playing a part when you're acting. Yes, you might in certain situations, I guess. I don't see the point in that way, but I can imagine certain people behaving a certain way because it's an expected response from them rather than an actual response. Oh, Dave's frozen. Oh, you're back. I can't hear you now, Dave. Oh, dearie me. So tonight we switched back to using Google Meet for the cameras, and looks like it doesn't like Dave. Typically.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah, your camera's pretty much frozen, but your voice is back.
Yeah, like I say, after about an hour, for some reason, when I'm streaming, my computer starts to go a bit mental.
Ah.
And it starts clogging up and freezing, and I can't close windows, and I can't click on anything. And it's doing it now.
How typical.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what it is. Once I've closed stuff down, it seems to recover after a few minutes.
If you can get to the point where you close it down.
Well, yeah, that's it. It stops responding to button clicks and what have you. So,
well, I don't know if you got what I said there, but it was more along the lines of I can understand that some people might play a part in situations, but I don't personally see the point in playing a part. I think that you should be real, and if you're feeling the fear, then you feel the fear, and if you're not, then you're not.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's necessarily the same sort of level of justification as the previous one.
No, but it does explain why, I think there are people that do this. Friends go and but here's a good example of how you can actually feel a feeling from a film. Rocky. You know the Rocky syndrome?
Feel power.
And that's it. So you get that feeling of kind of getting involved and getting the adrenaline. So that kind of shows that there are actual, honest, even if not emotional responses, but quasi-emotional responses to film. And the same thing happens with horror.
A couple of people in the chat room talking about their favorite comedy horror films being Shaun of the Dead.
One of the best.
I would agree, actually. I think it was probably the last good one those two did as well.
Yeah, I didn't mind Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, it was okay,
but yeah, it didn't have any of the genius that Shaun of the Dead did.
Yeah, and apart from the stuff which was just a callback to Shaun of the Dead. But yeah, Shaun of the Dead. I haven't seen that in years, but it was a nice parody, but not a full on parody. It was their own thing, and it was good. But yeah, that one for now. One I think that anyone who has who knows about it has probably seen it by now, or will never see it. So
yeah. And if you haven't seen it and you're a fan of zombie films, and especially self-aware takes of zombie films, you're missing out on one of the best self-aware takes of zombie films.
There you go. That's Dave's recommendation for the night. How many $1 bucks they paid you, Dave?
Yeah, I'm just an absolute shill. What can I say? Okay, so that's the paradox of horror. And so there's a lot of themes within horrors. Um, People might not pick up on them. People probably do. Like there's a popular. Ooh, you okay there?
Yeah, I don't remember what I did with my drink. Oh no, I put it on the chair behind me. There it is. You can see it on the glass.
You want?
No, it's
Oh
fine.
yeah.
I finished it, but yeah, that's all.
Okay.
No, feel free to continue. I will probably have to do a drink break though, at some point.
Do you want to? Because this will kind of be the final stretch. So do you want to go grab one now?
Yeah. Have fun tonight, Jared. Enjoy your dinner, and yes, we are going to take a brief break because I need a new drink and a wee. So I will catch you all shortly. I'll put us on. Be right back. And have fun in the chat room whilst we're gone. There you go. It was only one song I made you sit through. Right, yeah, sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'm lucky I don't hear the songs.
That particular one that was playing is one that I wrote with my friend who was a guitarist. I'm trying to think how many years ago it was now. I don't even like thinking. That was about 7. I'm so old now. But if anyone can tell me where the sample that is in that song comes from, the only words in it, I don't know. I'll do something on the stream. I don't know. Put your picture up there for a week or something like that, saying that you're the winner. Because we're covering off movies. It's from a movie, so it's a quote from a movie, and technically it's from a horror movie as well, so it's relevant to tonight, right? And I didn't even plan that. I just somehow,
Nice.
And I tell you what, if Dave had actually heard it, I'm sure he'd have picked up on it straight away. There you go. What happened in the chat whilst I was gone? Is there anything I need to catch up on and discuss?
There wasn't a lot going on. I recommended Tucker and Dale. I know you don't like that one, but Mark says he's going to have a watch, so I've asked him to give me his thoughts on it. Like, post them in the chat, the comment section, or what have you.
Yeah, that's fair. I think
And
it's with a movie like Tucker and Dale. I think you sort of have to know what you're getting into. Like we were saying earlier, some movies can be sort of so bad they're good, and other things around that. I don't think going into that, I was prepared for it being a dumb horror that's laughing at itself.
yeah, I think it's not quite as dumb. It's a very clever, self-aware film, but like you said, if you go into it not knowing that and not knowing it's going to be that kind of comedy, then you'll be kind of disappointed because it plays itself off as a hillbilly murderer wrong turn kind of film in the descriptions and in the posters and the trailers and that kind of thing. But it's actually not. It's a total spin on its head of those tropes.
Yeah.
And it's basically also a Schadenfreude? I can't remember the actual.
I can't.
Yeah,
the German
I can't
one.
pronounce it. Yeah, but it's based on that kind of comedy.
Yeah, fair. Oh, cool, Kimmo. For just flat out spoofing horror, try the abominable Dr. Phibes. Is that Phibes or Phoebes?
Phibes.
And Dr. Phibes Rises Again. Early 70s comedic horror. Interesting.
Yeah, they're amazing films.
I've definitely not seen those, but I will try and have a look into it because it's the season, and I've been putting more horror on. Actually, before we get into the next section, I just started watching the Resident Evil TV series. The first episode was okay. I'm bought in.
Yeah,
that's as far as I can tell you. I don't know if it's going to get better or worse or what, but
the first half is pretty good. Second half of the season, not so much.
So it basically emulates what the movies did.
Yeah,
it gets progressively worse to the point where you're like, why are they still making these?
And it ends on a cliffhanger. I'll warn you now, it ends on a cliffhanger.
But it's only supposed to be an 8-season thing and not continuing.
They cancelled it.
Yeah.
But it ended on a cliffhanger. Yeah. So I thought I'd better warn you for that one.
Do you know what? All the things I enjoy watching as well always end up being quite short. They're either limited series that only have 1 or 2 seasons, or they get cancelled. I mean, you look at shows like Firefly or Alphas or anything like that. They all get cancelled.
That's why I was glad that Legion actually played its whole run out. I know it was only 3 seasons, and I was very surprised they didn't cancel it because it's very out there and very clever, but it managed to finish its run.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The same can be said for Future Man. That was something that was cleverly dumb. Like,
Yeah, one of my favorite shows ever.
you could enjoy it without thinking about all the cleverness. You could enjoy the dumb comedy side of it, but you could also enjoy the clever side of it as well, which added another dimension. And yeah, again, it was only short. I think it was only 3 seasons as well, wasn't it?
3 seasons, yeah.
Yeah. And it had definitely run its course, but I still wanted more. And I think that's
Yeah, I'd
almost...
love to see a reboot of it. Or not a reboot, but like a revisit to it, even if it was just a limited season.
Yeah, definitely. So I know it's not horror, but check out Future Man if you get a chance. Now, Dave, would you regard something that's absurdist to, like Dave Made a Maze, to sort of have some horror elements to it? Because they were in that maze and there were the monsters there.
Yeah, not just that, it also plays on certain fears that a creative writer might have. So, one of the things about horror is that it might only be horror for a certain section of the population. And I mean, you can find this in cultural relevances as well. What might be scary in Korea might not be scary in America. What might be scary in America might not be scary in Korea. And there are themes in films where there are certain levels of horror that might not be relevant to other people, but they've made a maze. It's that fear of being stuck in a creative block and trying to find your way out. So yeah, I think there are certain horror elements in it, but maybe not for everybody.
And I wouldn't straight up say it's horror in its first genre either. It's just, as I said, there's horror elements to it. The tertiary part of what the film is. I mean, it's majorly absurdist and really entertaining.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite films. And this is one of the problems I have when people say, I'm just getting into horror. What can you recommend to me? It's like, well, I don't know. What do you fear? You know, what are the kind of things you worry about? What are the kind of horror films you enjoy?
Dave has such sights to show you.
Yeah, I do if I know what you actually kind of worry about. And like, do you just want to be disgusted? Do you want to be frightened? Do you want to lose yourself? Do you want to have to think about something? That's one of the reasons why horror is kind of underappreciated, because there's all these elements to horror. You can find a horror that just keeps you on the edge of your seat or pushes you back in your seat, as I say, that makes you think about it, that kind of disturbs you for a couple of days afterwards. Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is a good example of that. The Strangers is another one that's kind of like that, where it's the home invasion thing, and it has one of the most frightening lines in any horror film ever. They break into the people's house, they torture them all night, and at the end, the people go, "Why are you doing this?" And the actual people in the home, the actual killers just go, "Well, you were home." Which is one of the most frightening lines that you could hear in a horror film.
Yeah.
Especially if you're thinking about in real life. Why did these people torture you all night? Well, because you answered the door.
Yeah, just cause, basically.
Yeah. And a lot of violence can be kind of like that. It's happened to you just because you were in the wrong place at the right time. Or right time at the wrong place. Right place at the wrong time, however you want to put it.
Yeah. I suppose that's this perspective you're taking on it from his point of view.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I've actually seen that movie. I've just brought it up on IMDb. But you're right, that sort of thing is somewhat terrifying. It's I don't know if it's COVID inspired or what, but we've noticed like a lot of crime happening locally, whether it's robberies or people just burning things down. I mean, twice they burnt down the bushes across the road from us, and they've burnt down the woods twice, and they've been burning other areas, and more those sorts of things happen, and it's just they're doing it just because. There's no real purpose to it. There's no vendetta. You know, and I'm not saying a vendetta would excuse them from the behavior, but it would have an explanation that is a little bit more than what we wanted to.
Yeah. One of the most scary things is bad things happening with no explanation. I mean, if I know this is slightly different, but you think about something to do with like a lot of religious people, they believe in the universe having a purpose and that things happen for a reason. This bad thing has happened to me because God is trying to strengthen me. Well, that's that fear of randomness and that fear that things can happen to you for no reason whatsoever and they could be the worst thing in the world. And it just happened. And there's no good reason for it, there's no explanation for it. And that's one of the themes that horror plays on very much so.
Yeah, and as we've said a number of times, there's a lot to horror, a lot more than people give it credit for. And I think you were going to talk about some themes that people often don't
That
see,
yeah.
weren't you?
Yeah, that's the segue I was kind of going. That makes a nice segue into it because that's what we're going to talk about is some of the common themes. One of the things about horror is that it can have a social commentary, and not just like the social commentary in the way that you think of it, but it can tell us the kind of fears that a particular society has at that time and tells us the kind of superstitions that a society might have at that time. You think about the slashers. Now, they came after a rise in serial killers. Like there was serial killers have been around for a very long time, but in the 70s there seemed to be the explosion of them. The BTK killer, Edmund Kemper, Ted Bundy, you know, they became part of the zeitgeist. They were given a name in the 70s,
And people
serial
started
killers.
locking their doors.
Yeah. And they were buying extra security because of it, even though the chance of it happening to them was very, very slim. Um, People still bought into it and they bought the fear, and that made its way into horror films in the form of the slasher. And so that the slasher kind of tells us, that was kind of one of the themes. And as Rev brought up earlier, another theme was nuclear waste.
Hmm.
Um, and Craig's just mentioned the original Godzilla was about the fear of the nuclear age. And it could only be created by Japan because Japan was the only one that ever had a nuclear bomb dropped on them. So it tells us the fear of that society. And horror has these kind of themes that does that.
And I think you could even argue that comic style movies lean into this with the mutations, or even think about the turtles and the mutagen, and that sort of thing. They sort of lean into those fears as well, but they're done in a slightly different way that they try and put
They
a
shape
positive
it into a
spin.
way that stops you fearing it
Yeah.
quite so much. Yeah.
Whereas the horror builds on that fear and makes it the worst thing possible.
Well, if you think of one of the most frightening horror films in the 80s in Britain, Threads. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Sorry, say again?
Threads,
No.
about nuclear war and a bomb being dropped on Britain. And it's people trying to survive in Leeds after the fallout and after the bomb. And it's one of the most bleak, depressing, and scary films you will ever see in your life. And it could only come from that time because at that time you had the whole Cold War, nuclear arms race going on, and everybody was in fear that somebody was going to go crazy and push the button. Have you seen Dead Zone?
That sounds familiar,
Stephen King
but
had Christopher Walken in it.
didn't they do a TV series of
A
it?
TV show, yeah.
Yeah, I saw the
with
TV
Anthony
show.
Michael Hall.
Yeah, I saw the TV show, but I don't think I've watched the movie.
Well, I don't know if you remember the first season, but it was very much about him coming back, and there was a senator who was trying to gain power, and the lead character touches him, and he sees him going mental and getting crazy, and he pushes the button. That was from the 80s. That was Stephen King, and that was one of the common social fears at the time, the whole kind of nuclear war thing. So that kind of tells us what people were fearing at that time in that country. People don't fear nuclear war so much now. What they fear is this sort of chemical war. And that kind of comes through now in like Resident Evil type films. It's a chemical thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think people fear general uprising and riots and stuff like that as well. And I mean, that's actually happening in the world, but a lot of movies that I've seen there's been this sort of thing going on as well. It was quite present in that Peripheral movie I was watching the other day. This particular person wrote a book that inspired riots, and I mean that was just the smallest bit at the beginning, and it was sort of a background theme, and it wasn't the whole sort of thing, but you could see that there was this tension between the publisher and the author, and she wanted to write, and what the author wanted, so the publisher wanted to write, and that sort of thing going on there. But yeah, I can see what you mean though, and I suppose that's the same sort of thing where you can see like movies like The Exorcist are produced by quite a Christian culture, and
yeah,
a lot of horror movies that deal with some form of possession, especially in the past. I mean, vampires always used to have that religious element to it where the cross would protect you from them. And you look at modern vampire movies, that's generally not so much a part of it. It doesn't matter. It's not a religious thing. It might be that there's, silver, and it might still have the heart that you have to go through or cut off the head. But that religious element has been removed from a lot of modern vampire movies because I suppose the world is generally less religious, even if there are still a lot of Christians out there or a lot of people who appreciate the Abrahamic faith. It's not necessarily as big a part of them. I mean, you think about the way the UK is, it's Church of England, whatever. Yeah, that's about it for their religion. They might occasionally go to church or whatever, but it's not the same sort of rigorous practice that they would have gone through 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about the Omen film. Came out in the 70s. It was huge. See you later, Mark. Sorry, just seen Mark saying he's going
have yourself a good one, Mark.
In the 70s, it was a very good film, and it, people lapped it up. Then they remade it in 2011 or whatever it was. And even though it was beat for beat the same, and people didn't enjoy it because it was just beat for beat the same, but that sort of Christianity and that sort of thing doesn't really hold worldwide anymore. Whereas in the 70s, there was that kind of underlying current within European countries and that kind of thing. So yeah, how the society is at the moment can kind of affect the themes in horror and what we take from them and what we fear in them. I mean, The Omen is one of my favorite films. I love religious horror, even though I'm not religious.
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to religious horror. It's, I mean, we often talk about some of the benefits that you can get from religion, and I actually think horror is one of them. Some of the themes that come out of it, definitely. Especially if you think about certain things that are in religious texts and how people personify them. Yeah, it's quite amazing. But I mean, even with Constantine, for example, I know that's comic book horror basically. But even like the Keanu version, I really enjoyed that. But I really, really, really enjoyed the TV series. I wish they hadn't cancelled that. I don't know if you ever saw that. Yeah. But I mean, you think about Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, that is brilliant. Although my favourite Dracula film is probably Dracula Untold, which came out in about 2014, I think. By far the best of all of them. Although I'm going into the realms of Dracula rather than staying on topic. Sorry.
It's all good. Because that's something that can be talked about in a bit. Sort of one of the themes in Dracula. So that is kind of a big theme in horror, is the supernatural element, because even though we don't believe in supernatural things, like, there's still this mystery, isn't there? Like, imagine if there was this realm where there's these things that have power that we have no control over, but they have control over us, which is sort of one of the themes in The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
There's this power that nobody can actually do anything about. And if it decides to take you, it takes you. And there's a theme of like corrupting the innocent when it comes to supernatural horror. And you think about like ghost stories. You move into a new home. You always have fears when you move into a new home. The boiler might break. The wall might collapse. You might not be able to afford it. And there's something very scary about buying a new home. But what if when you moved into a new home, there was already somebody who lived there?
Mm.
Somebody you couldn't see, somebody who could control you and make your life a misery. So it plays...
Got some bad juju, man.
Yeah. But those themes can kind of play on what are actual things and intensify them. And that's one of the themes of horror, is taking common fears and making them into this really intense, overblown thing.
As Command Cyborg brings up there, Poltergeist was one of those that very much
one of my favorite films
sort of
ever. Yeah.
And also, he says earlier when we were just talking about Dracula that he heard in a Dracula documentary that people in those parts thought that you became a vampire by converting from Orthodox to Catholic or the other way around. Anyway, Vlad the Impaler did. Yeah, I remember learning about Vlad the Impaler because I used to have such a fascination with vampires when I was younger, and then when I actually learnt about what one of the roots was thought to be with the whole Vlad the Impaler thing, it was like, but yeah, very, very, very interested in. Again, that was so long ago. It's all so long ago now, Dave.
Everything is forever ago for me. I'm like 90 years old.
Kimmo also says the Ninth Gate was pretty much overlooked as horror goes, but it had some pretty creepy pseudo-religious stuff.
I think that's the Johnny
Depp one. That's about as much as I know about it, though.
I remember enjoying it when I watched it, but I haven't seen it for a very long time.
Yeah. Occasionally I see it when I'm flicking through films and think, oh yeah, I should watch that, but I've never had the inclination to actually click go on it. Maybe that's one for the weekend, because I've been trying to find some new horrors. Though what I really, really do want to watch is that new Hellraiser.
It's pretty damn good. I kind of prefer the originals, but I suppose that's an anchoring bias, maybe. But I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I really enjoy. I suppose if not in any particular order, but 2, 5, 6, and 8, and either 9 or 10, but I can't remember which. But Yeah, they're my favorites. I also really like one because it was but I find the first four haven't dated well at all. Even though the first two are still pretty good films, third and fourth. One of them was all right. What the one, the Hell on Earth one, that was crap. They shouldn't have done that one.
I call that the Hellraiser for the American audience.
Yeah, they shouldn't have done that. But I like the one with the fifth one, which was with Willem Dafoe. He's the detective.
He's the cop. Yeah,
that was pretty good. The sixth one, because it had the callback to the second one, and when I was watching it, I was like, "Why does she look familiar?" Because I didn't read the synopsis or anything. I was just like, "New Hellraiser, don't want to know anything about it, want to watch it." And then it was just like, yeah, and I like that. And then the eighth one appealed to the geek in me. It was Hellworld, wasn't it? So it was the MMO RPG one.
I don't remember that one.
So essentially, they were buried alive and given drugs and thought that they were in the Hellraiser world, but the guy who had done it actually ended up being that sort of, and it was quite cool. And then there were the new two with the new Pinhead, which I didn't like that they changed Pinhead because the guy that played Pinhead was so iconic.
Doug Bradley is Pinhead.
Yeah. But I'm interested what they've done with the whole sort of reboot gender swap Pinhead.
It works.
Yeah. Because it's fresh then. It's not like, oh yeah, we're continuing on but just with a different actor. It's like, no, here's a new thing.
Yeah.
That's sort of a reboot but sort of not. Like, cool, let's go with it. I can accept that. Wicked. Side note, my daughter earlier told me that I have a willy and her and mummy and Ella all have vaginas, except Ella is also a boy like daddy.
Okay, fair enough.
Shit 2-year-old saying that. Like, why even just come out with that?
Well, that's something I'm going to speak about shortly.
Willies?
Children. No. I mean, they're scary anyway.
Yeah. You've only seen the first two or three back in the day, Command Cyborg. Well, I have to say that I can understand why people might not like the Hellraiser movies. I like the concepts within them, and I do think that, I mean, the first one laid the groundwork, but it is too dated now. The second one was pretty good, but again, dated. Third one, Hellworld, no. Fourth one was Bloodlines, which it has its good points, but it just didn't quite click as well for me. Fifth one, Willem Dafoe, Detective, really liked it. Saw it coming, but it was good. Sixth one, call back to the second. Yeah. And the new one, I mean, I think, do you know what? I wish we could all do a watch party and watch the new one together and have all of our reactions recorded on different mic tracks, and just so that we can, like, I think it'd be absolutely fantastic, especially for those of us who haven't seen it in the first place. I'd love to do something like, I don't know if any of you out there have ever seen Mystery Science Theater 3000, but that's when I lived out in America and we had cable. It was one of those shows that came on where they're watching these terrible movies with these comedy over the top, and I'd love to do something like that, except it's like us chatting shit. No love for Candyman. I remember the theme tune, Candyman. That was with all the bees, wasn't it? Didn't he take children or something? I can't remember.
Tony Todd.
I was about to watch the reboot the other day, actually, when I was looking for a movie to watch. but I didn't know if it was going to be any good. I think it's worth checking out. I will.
It's brilliant, and there's some amazing camera work in it.
One of the things is quite difficult is generally when we've got time to watch, wife and I try and watch something which is not big on her horror, which is fair enough. I mean, we like what we like. I think because at the moment with the kids and stuff like that, it causes her to worry at night, and she doesn't need that on top of everything. Because it's a genre that I love. You know.
Yeah, Emma wasn't into horror until we got together, and then I started showing her the better horrors, and she's now a big fan of horror.
Wicked.
Okay, so getting back to themes in horror.
Mm-hmm.
Another theme is man being the creator, or being this sort of godlike thing. You think back to Frankenstein. This is kind of a good example. Dr. Frankenstein, he becomes a god. He creates life. And in some sense, this plays on the fear of science that was coming in at the time. People were beginning to fear science and what it could do. But Frankenstein loses control of his creation, and it becomes death embodied. Yeah. And if you think about many of the horror films, the one you watched the other night is a good example because it's to do with AI.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those films now that are man creating things but losing control are in regards to AI.
Mm.
So it shows that common fear, and the whole idea of man being creator and not being able to control its creation is a theme that it runs through our history. So that's another theme of horror, and that's one that plays to all of us. And I mean, if you think about the Terminator, that is a similar, I know it's sci-fi, but that plays on a similar kind of trope. We build Skynet, Skynet takes over. The Matrix is another one. That's, a
yeah,
kind of
all of
recent
them
one.
had that sort of theme. I'd
Yeah.
argue the first Terminator was a horror, though.
Oh, it definitely was, yeah.
I mean, the second one was much in the way of Aliens. It was sci-fi action. You have the elements of horror with the big bad, but the second one is that sci-fi action. But the first one was a horror.
Yeah. And not just that, it's not just man losing control of his creation, but that creation becoming powerful enough to actually alter our history, not just our future, but our history. And if you think of
terrifying, really.
well, that's one of the modern thought experiments. Is it the basilisk something or something like that, where it's a computer in the future, and if you're not working towards bringing it about, once it comes about, it punishes you in the past.
That's why my life is like this.
Yeah, same. I just blame that.
Nothing to do with me. It's this computer. It's fucked it up for me.
Yeah. Another theme is children. Like I said, we're going to bring up children. Another theme is the fear of children. And if you think about children, they're lost in their own kind of world. They don't have the kind of moral sentiments towards other people that we do as adults. They live in their own world. They live in their own set of moral frameworks. And
they haven't developed their empathy yet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even physically possible for them at the start. They might have the beginnings of it, but and something can stop that development as well. There are things that can actually stop them developing their empathy.
And if you think about films like Children of the Damned, that's kids. Oh, apparently we've got fireworks going on.
Just thought it.
No, mine are much louder than that. Um, yeah, it's kids who are becoming smarter than the adults around them. Yeah, and becoming so powerful they can take on the parents and take on the adults and control the adults. And one of the things that people fear is children. When you have a child, you worry about whether you're going to be able to give it a good life,
Mhm.
um, whether it's that kid's going to grow up to be a well-adjusted thing, well-adjusted kid, well-adjusted adult. They're things to me. I hate them. Yeah. um, so that's another common theme because children are something that we always have. And have you know Lord of the Flies?
I know of it, yes.
That's another horror theme. Um, Kids left to their own devices, and in some senses, it plays onto our fear of what would happen if a government collapsed or we were left without a government to protect us.
Return to a
We
state of nature.
Yeah, and we would become these violent thugs, and it's played out through children because we know that children are kind of scary. And that will always be a common theme in humanity. Um, I know Brave New World is a sci-fi, but it's also kind of a horror when you think about it. What happens when the government becomes so powerful that it just
Every element.
controls everything? Yeah, and it pumps you full of drugs so that you don't realize the kind of terrible state you're living in.
And
And
you're happy with it anyway, even if you do start thinking about it.
yeah, um, so government control is another theme in horror, or the
Mm,
collapse of government is another popular theme in horror because it's the kind of thing that we fear. Whereas I know they don't make them in China or Korea, but the government themes in those kind of countries, if they were allowed to make them, would be very different
yeah.
because the government has total control and it's not the fear of the collapse, it's the fear of the government itself.
Actually, tying into this, there are a lot of movies that were released over the last couple of years that had those themes of drones and people being watched, all privacy gone, and these systems set up that will fully protect you, but actually being used by the government to, sometimes take out people that they wanted gone for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you think about one of the things about Alexa, okay, I didn't set mine off. Yeah, one of the things about the echoes is is Amazon listening to us? Is
mm,
Apple listening to us? App Fear of Apple tracing you on their phone? Yeah. Um, so that's another common fear that really only comes about today.
yeah,
Although you could sort of see it in starting from the 50s with 1984. The government always listening.
but nowhere near the
But
level of it actually happening because we've basically signed the contract that
we've
said it's
done it.
okay. Like
Yeah, yeah, that's it. We signed the terms and conditions. Yeah,
our phones, our Alexa devices or Google Home devices or whatever, their mics are always on because they are listening for the wake up word, which they never
yeah,
respond to. They respond to pretty much anything else you say, but not the actual wake up world that you set, no matter which wake up world you set. And then you ask them to do something and they do something completely different. But, you know,
yeah,
uh, technology perhaps not quite there yet to do anything too mischievous, but still worrying all the same. And I can understand why it influences a hell of a lot of horror, and why it influences a lot of conspiracy theories online and stuff like that as well. Because it's a more realistic conspiracy than some of the shit that people come up with.
yeah, absolutely. Another theme is feminist issues. Um, and there's a couple of nice, easy examples here. The Handmaid's Tale. Women's fear of becoming slaves, becoming sex slaves, having no say in how their lives go, no say in their direction, absolutely controlled. They become breeding machines. the whole loss of identity, which is another theme that's in horror, is loss of identity. But have you ever seen Rosemary's Baby?
No.
It's about a woman who moves in with her husband into an apartment block. Moves with her husband into an apartment block, and the neighbors are Satan worshippers. They're Satanists. And the husband makes a deal with them to let the wife be impregnated by the devil, and she has no control over whether she can have. She has no choice to have the baby, and she fears the thing growing inside of her and what it's going to become, and the fear that she no longer has any control over this what's happening. She has no control over whether she can give birth and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's something that's happening today. Women losing their right over their body. So that's a kind of feminist horror issue.
Yeah, and the fact that it's becoming a reality, especially in places like America, is
it makes it more horrific and more relevant.
Yeah, I mean, horror shouldn't be something that people are actually living in there. And if it is, it should be a fringe case of something terrible, and that is dealt with. The fact that it is so prevalent in certain parts of the world, especially, this particular issue. But let's get back to, more lighter things like slitting throats.
Well, another theme that you kind of see in horror is the loss of identity, the loss of yourself.
Questions like what it is to be human, us.
Not just that. Have you ever seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
Oh yeah, great movie.
Yeah, one of my favorites, and has one of the greatest endings in a horror film ever. But that's about the fear of there's this thing going on, and it's taking everybody over, and it's coming for you, and you will no longer be who you are. It's death encroaching on you, but not death in a physical sense, but death in your body will still be alive, but you will no longer be there. And that's another fear. If you think about something like senility, that's one of the fears that we have, is our loss of identity. That's what makes being senile so scary.
Yeah, and I must admit, I mean, like, as a general real world fear, that is something that I fear. I suppose by the time it happens, I might not anymore.
Well, you wouldn't know any different. So that's another common theme that you can find in horror. Yeah. Another common trope is the fear of nature. You think about something like The Happening, it's a shit film, but that's the theme. That nature, because nature is uncontrollable for the most part.
Would you sort of tie in things like the Day of the Triffids into that? Well,
yes.
Yeah.
We have no control over nature. And there's films like Day of the Animal, I think it is. It's an Australian film. They go camping and they kill a wildlife, and the rest of the wildlife turns on them and comes at them, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. Jaws is another good example. It's the fear of nature. What's in the water? What's out there? You can't reason with a shark. And all the shark wants to do is kill you.
And you also notice that in the modern world, people are less concerned with a great white. So I've not seen the movie, but they had to do a movie about the megalodon.
Yeah, the Meg.
Yeah. Because, simple great white shark, not scary enough anymore. People are a bit more aware and Okay, yeah, a shark attack would be scary, but the chances of it happening, But hey, do you know what? In the deep waters, there could be a megalodon. And if it came to the surface, you're fucked.
Well, that brings up a kind of callback to what we said about nature, man being the creator of things and losing control. Jurassic Park is a very good example of that kind of horror as well.
Man trying to control nature and failing.
and nature turning on him. Yeah.
2 in 1.
Yeah. Another one, and this brings us back to the descent that we were talking about earlier, is the fear of the unknown, the fear of the darkness, the fear of being trapped in somewhere you can't get out of, and not knowing what's in there.
Yeah, I mean, the trapped one is so present in. I mean, you can think about it in so many different ways. I generally prefer to take steps, for example, than an elevator, just because I don't want to get caught in an elevator. Like, so on some level, it's the annoyance of being stuck in one for a long time. I'd get hot and sweaty and all of that, but it could be a lot worse than that. And I don't know if I'd be the sort of person that would freak out in the elevator if I was trapped. Not sure I'd be that guy. But if it was in a cave and the walls started closing in, I think I would. I think I very much would be that guy that was freaking out.
I think most people would. Even if they wouldn't care to admit it, most people would, because that's kind of scary. Trapped and dying alone is something that's very scary to us. And that's why there's a lot of the whole man gets trapped in the desert. No water, can't find his way out.
Buried alive,
yeah.
Those ones, I even want to get cremated, just in case I'm actually still alive.
Yeah.
If I can afford it, I'm going to get made into a diamond.
Tree, that's what I want. Cremated, put into a pot,
and then I'll smoke you.
Planted. Yeah, that would be good enough. You could do the whole how high.
Suddenly I get all the philosophical answers I've been trying to extract from your brain just from a couple of tokes.
Another fear, another common theme in horror is the unstoppable and ongoing kind of approach of death. Now you think about Halloween. Okay, that plays into the whole serial killer and somebody you can't reason with. But if you think about it, that kind of resembles death. Death is always coming at you.
It's always a slow march, isn't it, as well? He's never running at you, really. It's like...
It's just constantly coming.
And it's just there. And you're just like, hang on. I've just crossed. I've done all of this. I've been running for ages. And you're still just round the corner. It doesn't matter where I go, you're just round the corner walking towards me.
And you never know when you're going to bump into it. Yeah. And hiding in the closet isn't going to protect you. And that's that kind of theme. Another theme is sex. The relationship between sex and violence. How sex can turn somebody. Angel in Buffy is a good example of this.
Angel soul.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think we go back to Dracula here now, a fear that most men have is that their wife is going to meet somebody who just wows them, puts them under their spell, and takes them from them. And if you think about it, that's what Dracula is. He is that person who can bewitch your wife, your girlfriend, your partner. And she becomes so besotted with him that she can't leave him, and she wants to be with him forever. Not just be with him for a quick shag, but be with him forever, and there's nothing you can do to change that.
Yeah. And he also, effectively, in the Bram Stoker version, gave away his soul for his woman.
For that, yeah.
his woman was taken from him by God in his eyes, so he became an affront to God.
So that he could do it over and over. Yeah. And it's kind of poetic and beautiful, but at the same time kind of scary, and it plays into some of men's kind of primal fears.
Mm.
And those are some of the common themes that you can find in horror.
Yeah, and I mean, there's more typical themes that sort of feed into things like our phobias.
Yeah.
You think about like arachnophobia and all of that just sort of plays on this thing, and then you get the more comedic take on it, like eight-legged freaks.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. It plays into our fear of nature, something that I was talking about, like arachnophobia. There's all these spiders that appear, and you can't reason with these spiders, and they're poisonous, and you never know where they're going to be. You could put your hand under a table, get bit, you're dead. Um, and here's another one that's sort of relevant to today. Have you ever seen the film Wreck?
No, that's one that I've very much intended to get round to watching, because I like that sort of movie. I've seen a few that do a similar sort of thing, and they were very, very like lowly rated by other people. But I saw those sort of cam style movies, when done right, are done really well.
This is one of the best examples of that. But the whole theme of being trapped in a quarantine zone with people who could kill you, and they pass on a virus, and that's all seems very relevant to today. And you think about the whole response to COVID, there was a lot of that going on. People being afraid to be near other people confining themselves to their home, and even still fearing it in their home that somebody could knock on their door and bring death to them.
Mm. As you mentioned, there's loads of themes in horror, and do you know what? I would say we probably haven't even really scratched the surface of all the things we could discuss about horror, and the things that you can find within it. But I think horror is basically how some people see philosophy. They might not touch it, even though if they actually spent some time understanding it, they'd find a lot that they could learn from it and enjoy from it, and all the same sort of thing. And horror is one of those genres where actually there's a lot more to it than these slasher things, these jump horrors. And even as you mentioned earlier, there are still themes that you can take away from those movies which aren't simple jump scares. There's that social commentary that could be going on within them that can be very relevant to you. And there's the same with like philosophy. A lot of people reject philosophy as a whole, yet go on to discuss philosophical concepts poorly because they haven't taken the time to understand them.
Yeah.
And it's the same with tarring all horror with the same brush because you don't like the jump scares. Cool. I don't like the jump scares. I love horror.
Same. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good segue to go on to the final bit. I had a bunch of films that I was going to discuss, but I'll just kind of trim them down. We've already kind of discussed the theme in Rosemary's Baby and the theme in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but I'll give a couple more here. Most people know the theme in Dawn of the Dead, where consumerism takes over. People become just zombies.
Proper consumers.
Yeah, zombies. All they want to do is go to the mall. They want to consume everything, including you. But here's one that many people might not have picked up on: the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That is a film about the horror of factory farming.
Oh, interesting.
Now, you think about the way that these people are treated. They go into the home of people who were butchers for a very long time, and these people get chased down, and they get hung on hooks. They get put in freezers. They get chopped up.
They get treated as they treated the animals.
And there's the scene where the girl's at the dinner table about to be eaten. She's tied to the chair. She can't escape. They're going to chop her up. They're tasting her blood, tasting her flesh. That is a film where you can bring out a theme of the horrors of factory farming,
Mm. Yeah.
even if you might not think about it.
Yeah. And I think, especially if you've only watched a film like that once, you wouldn't necessarily think about that theme, because I think a lot of movies, especially horrors and other ones like certain thrillers and certain sci-fi films and things like that, they all have this undercurrent of stuff going on that you almost need that second or third watch to really bring all of the ideas to the table. You almost watch the foreground your first watch through. I mean, Fight Club is one of those movies that I watched a few times, where the first couple of times I was watching what was happening on the screen in front of me, and then after it, I spent the time watching the background and trying to think about the other themes within the story. And you know what? There are a lot of films that have a lot more layers to it than Fight Club. Fight Club is really great movie, really enjoyable, but it's a lot more obvious than some of the other movies that are out there. Have you frozen, Dave? We've lost Dave again.
Yeah, like I say, every hour.
Yeah, almost to the minute.
Yeah.
Almost to the minute, actually, Dave.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on with that one. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Like,
I can hear you, even if
recovery
you're a bit jerky, but I can hear you fine.
Yeah. So here's another one with Alien. Now, everybody picks out the horror of the industrial society, the horror of being owned by your company.
Yeah, the company is a big theme through all of the Alien movies, isn't it?
Yeah. But now here's the theme you might not have considered. The fear of men giving birth. What it would be like for a man to be raped and to be impregnated by an invasive species, similar to how a woman is.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, as soon as they find out this man has been impregnated by this invasive species, the first thing they want to do is kill it. And they spend the entire movie trying to kill this invasive species. So it's a thing about how men would react to being pregnant and how abortion would become sort of acceptable
if it was men.
The man. And that's a theme that not many people might pull out of that.
No, to be honest, I'd never considered that. I would never have thought of that as a concept. And I think the reason you don't think of it is because it is so alien. You know,
yeah.
If it was actually a very human-looking species that happened to rape a man and impregnate you, it would have pulled it out really obviously. But that's one of the other good things. I like the subtlety. And you know what? The fact that I've never picked it up, you can really see it coming through. Perhaps it is maybe that little bit too subtle for most people to pick up.
Yeah.
And maybe it was designed that way as well, because maybe it wouldn't have got past the test group.
It probably wouldn't have. Yeah, probably wouldn't have. But it's very well done. And it, like I say, you have to kind of think about these things and look into them and pull them out. And that's why horror can be so good.
If you're willing to take the time to think about it.
Yeah.
If you're someone that likes thinking, which admittedly the average person seems not to.
No. We mentioned social collapse before, and you can kind of think about that in the Purge films.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if there was no laws? How would you feel? Themes of social class and that kind of thing. But here's one that sort of ties in with the film The Thing as well. How do you know that the person in front of you isn't a monster? How do you know that you're behind the eyes of your neighbor, the people that you have invited into your house? And this comes from the first Purge film. How do you know they don't really want to kill you? And the only thing that's stopping them is social etiquette. There's actually a monster behind those eyes. Yeah. And, you know, the Thing kind of has that Purge and all has that theme, and also the kind of theme of the loss of self-identity in The Thing.
Yeah. I mean, that theme's there. I mean, obviously they're quite different with the way The Thing does it. The Purge is in some ways more terrifying because you can see it happening. Like, you can really see it happening. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
it's not an alien, it's your neighbor.
Yeah. And I'm sure at times most people have had a guilty thought of, you know what, if it wasn't legal, you know? Um, some people don't even care about that. But the fact that there could be people all around you that, given the chance, they would kill you. That they're just
Yeah.
putting on a facade. They're not being honest with you. That actually all year round they hate you and they're just pretending.
Yeah.
That is terrifying. But with the Thing, the other side of that is, as you mentioned, that the loss of the sense of self. You are. It's essentially the body snatchers thing, isn't it? You know,
It is, yeah. And
you've
that's
been
why it's a popular trope in sci-fi and in horror.
powerful
So
themes.
yeah, very powerful themes, they're very human themes, and lots of people miss out on them because it's horror. Horror isn't supposed to have these kind of themes. Horror is supposed to make you jump or make you a bit scared. And like, think of Nightmare on Elm Street. Another thing about social fears and social commentary. There was at the time there was the whole fear of the child molester, the kidnapper, and it plays on this theme of, well, you can protect your kids, but what if you couldn't? What if those could happen in their sleep? There are times where you can't protect your children, and these are one of them. And what if they could happen? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Which could even play in on a modern day take to internet.
Yeah, exactly.
There's
And that's why there's a lot of these kids meeting people online kind of horror going on now. I can't remember what happened to Megan or Megan is Missing. That was a new one that kind of from the last 10 years that a lot of kids are talking about because it plays on that kind of theme because it's what they fear.
Yeah,
And
and I suppose more rightly so as well, because again, the fear is more real because shit, this could and does happen to some degree.
yeah. There's quite a few other films, but we're on 2 hours now, and I'm thinking we should probably wrap up.
No, I agree, and we're trying to do a little bit of a horror theme because it's the season. Although next Tuesday we do have that stream with Martine and Kristen, where we're just going to be talking about adult diagnoses of autism and ADHD, and just a general chat about experiences. But then next Thursday is the wife's birthday, so we're not streaming then, but we're going to pick either Wednesday or Friday and do a stream then. And we can cover off a few more movies, and we were going to talk about how we can tie them into atheism as well, weren't we, Dave?
Yeah, that's right. Because you get a lot of people who become atheists and say, I can no longer watch ghost stories and supernatural themed horror because I just find them all ridiculous now. And you get atheists who say, well, the Omen isn't scary because, the devil doesn't exist. But that just because we're atheists doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to enjoy these films or enjoy the themes in these films.
No, exactly.
Yeah, we don't go into space, but most skeptics don't go on about how they can no longer watch Alien. I don't believe in aliens. I see no evidence they exist, so therefore I can't enjoy Alien anymore. I can't enjoy the body snatchers. Those are just, as far as I'm concerned, they're dumb skeptic takes.
Yeah, it comes back to that whole sort of fear of being associated with anything religious, and therefore allowing that level of control. And Command Cyborg, you've got a point there. It exists in the films, and that's one of the things that you can do. You can have. Was it Einstein that said it's the mark of an educated mind that can consider
Socrates?
Socrates. There you go. Some smart dead guy that knows a lot more than me. But yeah, the mark of an educated mind that can consider an
It's the mark
idea.
of an educated mind that can consider an idea without believing it.
Yeah, and that is something that you can enjoy from films. And as you say there, Command Cyborg, yes, they exist within the film. So it's a kind of like what if situation. What if actually God did exist and it was this particular way? What if actually there was a virus that could turn people into zombies? What if? And do you know what? I enjoy a good hypothetical. And again, it's
I do.
why I like sci-fi and horror, because uh, the good ones are
They're
good
visual thought
hypotheticals. Yeah,
experiments.
yeah, exactly. So well said, and thank you so much for actually helping us end on a high note that even tied back into philosophy.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned, next Tuesday is going to be about ADHD and autism, and then either Wednesday or Friday, we've got our stream on atheism and its ties to horror and skepticism. Dave, before we go, would there be any recommendations this week that you'd like to put out to people?
Reason to Doubt, who everybody knows, Jared and Jordan were on our channel last week. They're doing a video, I think it's tonight at 1 a.m. GMT, where they're answering 10 questions from atheists.
Awesome.
And Jordan was also on Godless Granny's thing, and that was quite an interesting discussion.
Awesome. So a double whammy from Reason to Doubt. Well, thank you very much, everybody who has joined us in the chat room, and everybody else that is watching or catching the rerun somewhere, wherever you are in the world. I've had a really enjoyable stream tonight, and thank you to the audience and Dave for making it so. And as Dave said, make sure you check out those two streams from Reason to Doubt, one on Godless Grannies and one about their 10 questions for atheists.
Cheers.
Have yourselves a good night, everyone. We'll catch you soon.